Thank you, guys. Good morning. I had the privilege of hearing just a little bit of the rehearsal of these pieces, and I heard Holly talk about the fact that that first song was talking about reminding the choir. The first song was about drinking the cider, and the second was kind of a revelry, passionate song about after you've drunk enough cider, right? So hopefully this is stirring in us some sort of divine intoxication in the beauty and the wonder of life. We gather here each week as a community that is refreshed and renewed, and we ourselves fruits of this earth, to press and to cherish our lives and to learn to better understand the nutrition and the joy as well as the pain and the sorrow in our world. And as we do each week, we join with Unitarians and Universalists and Unitarian Universalists all around the globe in lighting a chalice. Symbol of light and of warmth, symbol of knowledge and of freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love. As we continue our service, we will be singing hymn number 216, and this is a round. It is from the Jewish tradition, since we're continuing to acknowledge the fact that our Jewish siblings are in the high holy days, not the days between presidential debates, but the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The text here is in Hebrew. We'll be singing it in Hebrew, and in case you don't know Hebrew, which many of us don't, the words mean, turn us toward you, and we will return. Renew our days of old. So this is a song of longing to be turned towards our highest good, to be turned towards the best of life, and to be renewed. And here's how the pronunciation goes. Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai, Elecha, Vena, Shuva, Vena Shuva, Chadesh, Chadesh, Yamenu, Kekedem. All right? So we're going to sing this through all together twice, so that we get the feel of the rhythm and the words and the notation, and then we're going to sing it as a round a few times. I know, right? Just wait. Tom will be back any day. I won't make you sing any more rounds. When we do it as a round, we're going to have this side, along with this side of the choir, sing the first part of the round. This side, along with this side of the choir, do the second. And if you're a brave soul and you feel like you want to take on the third round, the third part of the round where the little number 3 is, feel free to jump in at 3. And if you don't make it all the way through, fine. Just jump back in with 1 and 2, okay? So all together once or twice, and then as a round a couple of times. And we'll feel it. We'll know when it's time, all right? Okay, here we go. Here we go. Some of you know that I've been going through yoga teacher training, and one of the pieces of wisdom that was passed along to us in our training yesterday was the wisdom of how our limiting beliefs can sometimes be the biggest obstacles in our lives. And I'm often reminded of that when we are asked to sing something with which we are unfamiliar. And yet how, when we let those things go, we can create something beautiful and let it come through us. And you just did. So too with our time of prayer and meditation and reflection. Regardless of whether you're a theist or an atheist or an agnostic, regardless of whether you address your intentions to some other being or to your highest good, or simply to the musings of the universe, I invite you now to turn in silence towards that which you find most holy, that we might join in prayer and meditation and reflection. Most holy beloved, we pause in this stretch of time to notice the way life continues to call out to us. To stir us, to seek to create in the midst of the storms of our lives a still point, a place to rest amidst the winds that swirl around us and within us. We pause to claim and to create for ourselves clarity, compassion, curiosity, courage, creativity. Amidst all of the ways that we are caught up in the storms of life, whether they are blowing off of coasts or blowing over airwaves or brewing on the internet or in our hearts and our homes. We, as a species and as part of this earth, need this space to breathe more deeply, to think and to feel more clearly. In these moments, in this hour, help us to find and to savor the fruit of our lives that can be pressed into cider. And if we find ourselves being pressed to, help us to find wisdom to know what that pressure might serve, how we might contribute to the celebration and the nourishment of the community around us. In this time of harvest and renewal, help us to find those in ourselves and our world. To these imperfect words, we add the silent intentions of our hearts. Shalom, salam, amen, and blessed be. Well, good morning. Welcome or welcome back to First Unitarian Church. For those of you that I've not yet had the pleasure of meeting, I'm Reverend Matthew Cockrum, a consulting minister with this congregation for the coming year. And it's my pleasure, along with the Reverend Tom Goldsmith, who's wrapping up his vacation and will be back in the pulpit this Sunday, and along with the board and staff, and frankly, with you, to serve the missions and the ministries of this great good place, which has been being a liberal religious force and voice in this valley for 125 years now. So it is an honor to be a part of this heritage in this place. We are blessed this Sunday to have, again, in our pulpit, will you be in the pulpit this Sunday, or will you be down there? You'll be up here, that's right, okay. So again, in our pulpit this Sunday, Robert Fulghum, who is a minister at large with this congregation and has been here for the last couple of weeks. So he'll be sharing some reflections and stories with us this morning. As we do each week, as we gather, we look at the many things of our lives and the many things in the life of this church that we might either contribute to or draw from And so at this point, I draw your attention to the announcements in your bulletin to remind you that there are a lot of ways that you can engage in this place if your life will allow you to, and a lot of ways in which this place needs you to engage. A couple of reminders. First of all, that there are many ways to connect with us, one of which is a little gray card in the pew in front of you. So if you ever need to communicate with the front office or any of the staff, you can fill out that little card and slip it in the offering basket as it goes by. Whether you need a new name tag or need to find out about any of the programs or just need a phone call, that's a great way to do it. You can also join the lunch bunch that meets after services every Sunday after the second service. And this Sunday they'll be meeting at the Copper Kitchen down on Broadway. So feel free to drop in there. They're always open for newcomers. Our Social Justice Council is reconvening next Sunday after service, after the second service. And our young adult group is meeting this Thursday night, 7:30 in the Haven, where I have the pleasure of being with them. Tom and I takes turns each month presenting conversation topics. So whether any of those speak to you or any of the others in your bulletin, I invite you to peruse that and to contribute or take part as your life allows you to. At this point now, we invite our ushers to come forward to collect this morning's offering and invite you to do so and to offer yourself to your neighbor as well with a good morning. Thank you.
I'm actually quite anxious because I'm not accustomed to being this high this early on a Sunday morning. I brought a Kleenex in case I get a nosebleed while I'm up here. High holidays. I grew up in a very strict Southern Baptist world. My mother was a black belt Southern Baptist. And I went on high holy days this day with my Jewish girlfriend. You can imagine how that went over at home. And when I came back, I was so pleased. I said, look, they gave me a hat. And I brought it back. You get the yarmulke of the way. And my mother said, well, they're just not Christians. I said, of course. Mother, Jesus was a Jew, and so was his mom. And on top of that, they didn't even have a Christmas tree. And my mother goes, wah! I haven't actually, on a weekly basis, been involved in the parish ministry for maybe 25, 30 years now. But it's been an honor to be here. People say to me, oh, we're honored to have you. No, the honor is mine. This is an extraordinary religious community. If you walk down the hall out here, you'll see the pictures of the ministers of the church, and most of them only lasted 3, 4, 5 years. The one you've got has been here 29 years. And that's remarkable for a man to be that respected and to serve a community that well for that long. And one of the reasons that I'm a member of this congregation and contribute to this congregation and am pleased to be here when asked is because I have such respect for Tom Goldsmith, who has such a remarkable mind, so much integrity, and so much passion for social justice. It's not an accident that a man would stay in a church 28 years, 29 years. You're going to have a hard time getting rid of him. And I can say the same thing about this congregation. It's been a lovely experience to be invited to dinner, to come to various occasions to meet with the youth, the young families. I love coming on Wednesday night, choir practice. You have this beautiful space all to myself with people singing to me. And money couldn't buy that. I mean, I know we pay you all a lot, but even I couldn't afford that. And then to come this morning, what sets me up on Sunday morning is to come when they are rehearsing, to see what was just closing together now becomes whole and full. You only heard what they sang this morning once. I got to hear it Wednesday night and this morning, and you're part of the ministers of this church. People keep saying, this church needs a second minister. You've got a second minister. There's one sitting right there. I don't think you should settle for having an elevator named after you. I would ask for a little more than that. I mean, come on. I'm serious. If I were the minister of this church and had as much influence as Tom, I would say that we ought to recognize the ministry that does exist in this church. We are not without many. I would think it's very important for you to be ordained as the minister of music of this congregation. Because you don't just play the piano or wave your hands. I've heard what you say about music in the life of this church. And this church has the right to do this. When I was in the Edmonds Unitarian Church for 20 years, and I met with the high school kids one morning, and they had been, as we'd like to do, we had sent the class off to the Catholic Church to see how Catholics do their thing, and one of the things they wanted to know was how come Unitarians don't have saints? Like we have a cheap, second-rate, marked-down religion. They have saints. We don't. They burn stuff in the chancel, and they do all this marching up and down in medieval costume. I mean, where are we in this? And I got to thinking about it, and I thought, we do have saints. There's a man in our congregation named Wilbur Saxton. He was a microbiologist, professor at the University of Washington. And he was one of those people who was always there, who always took care of other people, did the stuff that nobody else wanted to do, on the board, off the board, sweeping up, putting away the chairs. It didn't make a difference what. He was there. And people said over and over, Wilbur Saxton is a saint. So I said to the board and the congregation, if that's true, then why don't we canonize him? And on a Sunday morning, 4 strong men carried him in a chair and put him up here, put a crown on his head, and we recognized what we had, which was a saint. We went on from there. We didn't quit. We had an archangel, an angel. But you have those people in your congregation, and what's wrong with affirming them and recognizing how much they minister to the church? If you're ordained, I'll come and preach the sermon. And have I got a hat for you? The choir is responsible for something I'm about to do. I came on Wednesday night and listening to this music. It was like smoke drifting around in here. It was just gorgeous. And at a pause, one of the members of the congregation asked me, can I sing? And I shook my head emphatically. And what I really meant to say was that I don't read music, and I would make a mess of what they were trying to do. Even my voice is not great, except in the shower and the car alone. But nevertheless, I am a human being. I sing. So I'm going to begin the substance of what I've brought to say to you by singing to you. I don't know who's going to regret this more, you or me, but I'm going to sing something that every one of you know by heart. And when you catch on to what I'm singing, help me out. Rock-a-bye, baby, in the treetop. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall. cradle and all. I didn't hear your words. What did you say?
And I'll catch his fall.
Ah, a rescuer. That's a strange song that every one of you should know by heart. Your kids know it. Your grandparents probably. It's one of the first songs we teach little children. It's odd, isn't it? Welcome to the world. We have a song for you that's just for your age group. And it starts out wonderfully. Rock-a-bye baby. Who can't get behind that? We rock babies. It's dangerous to rock babies. That's what makes them throw up if you don't know. Or you see young mothers with young babies standing around doing this all the time, like this. You think, watch out, lady, you're going to get it. But so far, so good. Baby in the cradle, in the tree, beautiful. When the wind blows and you think, if a baby could understand this, how would it respond to what's happening? What's the cradle doing up in a tree? And then the wind blows. Oh, it's a stormy day in a cradle up in a tree. And then comes the clinker. When the bough breaks, what? Down will come the cradle and the baby and, oh, death. Welcome to the world. Hope you remember the words, and you did. It is strange. And yet, all foolishness aside, it is a serious message. Life begins with this loveliness, and sooner or later, the bough of existence breaks, and down we come, cradle, baby, and all. Might as well tell a child the truth right away. It's amazing to be a human being. Every person in this room 100 years from now will be dead, gone. We ain't going to make it beyond that. And this week I noticed that the furthest edge right now they think people could live is 125 years. Our bough will break sooner or later. And yet, knowing that, from very early on, we have this incredible courage to try to make things good and well while we are here. Amazing. And you're sitting in a whole room full of people who feel that way. Yeah, you know what's going to ultimately happen. And in the meantime, we try to make the world in which we live as rich and as strong and as good and as true as we can. Isn't that extraordinary? Why should we care? But we do. The invincible caring is something we carry as a flame way inside of us. I want to tell you about my son, Hunter. This morning, he's just gotten back from Japan, where he's been on 2 weeks on a pilgrimage, going from Buddhist sacred site to sacred site, hiking, hot spring to hot spring, and to fill his spiritual needs. Wednesday, he will be on a plane headed for Dubai, whereas he is the head of a creation contracting for the security systems for the new international airport in Dubai. I don't know anybody I like, admire, respect more than him. I hadn't always felt that way about him. When he was a little kid, there were times when I absolutely loathed the sight of him because he wouldn't mind, he wouldn't listen to what I had to say. He did everything his own way. He was bull-headed. Same values now means that he's an independent person who runs his own adult life, and is the same person, but bull-headed turns into admiration. The other reason I hate him is something he did for me when he was 5. I was a young parent, and I heard him crying in the night, and he was coming down the hall. I got up, didn't sleep with any clothes on, came around the corner of the hallway, and I had never heard of, nor experienced, nor seen something called projectile vomiting. I'd rather die than throw up. And I didn't know a small kid could hose you from 5 feet away through his nose. And I was like I say, I will never forgive him for that. But he has, I don't know whether he has had that happen to him yet, but when I get really old and senile and incapable of that, I'll get my turn. The reason I bring him up, two actually, he's responsible for the title of this morning's remarks, and then what happened. I got that line out of him when he was very young. And this is how it came to be. He was, when he was young, one of those kids we know of as the midnight stalkers who will get up and wander around the house in the middle of the night long after you thought they were asleep. And you will hear sounds in the house thinking you've got burglars, and it's just that kid wandering around in the middle of the night looking into cupboards and seeing how high he can get in the kitchen. And he was one of those kids. And so I would do anything to try to get him to sleep. And I've said before, I made my living in my life as a storyteller, and I was pretty good at it, so I would get out all the old chestnuts and we'd put Hunter down in his bed and start telling him the story and slowly modulating my voice till it got softer and softer and softer. And then the prince came and the princess went off to the castle and they lived happily ever after. And then a quiet voice would come out of the bed. And then what happened? And then what happened? So, okay, so I would keep on. Well, I would go on with the story and go on with the story and go on with the story. And the all-time winner was one night I thought, I'm going to get him where he can't ask me that. So I told him the story, and then the princess was run over by a grocery truck, and everything caught fire, and there was plague and disease, and then a comet hit the earth, blew the whole thing to smithereens, and there was nothing left but the pieces. And what happened to the pieces? What happened to the pieces? Life, I guess he knew, but certainly I know, and you know, it doesn't stop there. It's funny about having kids, the life that you see them live is not the life that they think they are living. You never get to see it all. You don't always know what's going on behind your back, nor do you want to know. The life they see you living is not the life that you're really living because they're not there a lot of the time. And what you do behind their back, they don't know either. So it kind of works out in an equation. And the thing that always interests me now that my son is well into his 50s, they don't listen to what you say, or you don't think they do. And then when you become a grandfather, or even more, Hunter is now a grandfather himself, you hear him saying to his grandson or granddaughter what you said way back then that he still has somewhere in his heart. That's how you know they heard some things you said. And I always say, don't worry that they don't listen to you. Worry that they watch you. Well, enough of that. We still got our pumpkin here because I want to pick up where I left off with Cinderella last week. If you remember, once upon a time, Cinderella, you remember what happened to her. Everybody seemed to know the story, but just to remind you how it usually ends is a happy ending. The prince comes and gets the princess, makes Cinderella a princess, and they ride off happily ever after to get married and live in the castle. And that's the end of it, happily ever after. If you read some of the sanitized versions or the grim versions, the ugly sisters had their eyes pecked out by birds, but it's a different kind of happy ending depending on how vindictive you are. But nevertheless, that's the end of the story. No. Think about the truth of this story. The prince was mostly interested in the feet of little girls. And he was mostly interested in shoes that fit the feet. He didn't come looking for the little girl. He came looking for whose shoe is this? So she went off to live happily ever after in the castle with a foot fetishist who was a lot older than she thought. And she went to live in the castle. This is a kid who lived by the hearth in rags. Imagine how well she fit into the castle of the king. Imagine what the staff and all the courtiers and all the people who worked there, they knew she was trash. They knew she came from the hearth. They knew why she had been picked, because of her tiny feet and the cute glass shoes. She wasn't held in much respect. Cinderella did not live happily ever after in the castle. There are women in this congregation this morning thinking, yeah, I married him, I went home to live in his house, and I didn't live happily ever after. 50% of the people who get married find it don't work out. And it didn't work out for Cinderella either. And she felt lonely, and she felt sad, and so something really strange happened. You remember that the pumpkin had been turned into a beautiful coach, and what went with it was horses that were mice, and there was the coachman. Remember the coachman? And it turned out the coachman was really handsome, good-looking, and available. Unfortunately, if you remember the story, at midnight he turned into a rat. A number of women could probably say, I understand how that happened. And that's when Cinderella began to get into projectile vomiting, actually, and she didn't live happily ever after. The piece is always, I mean, if you want to get really scientific about it, there's the law of the conservation of matter and energy. Whatever happens to stuff, it comes back in some other form. No energy or mass is ever lost. Or in Cinderella's case, life went on. Think about the real parts of this. Remember Lady Di? Beautiful, blonde, peach skin, innocent, big blue eyes. Her face haunts me because she looked like she was totally frightened by what had happened to her. And she, unfortunately, thought she married a prince who turned out to be a toad, and has yet to turn, I mean, he married a toadess, so it's all right, but when I think of her end and how way in over her head she was, and how she didn't belong in the palace, she never had any happiness in the palace, and we know she ended up having affairs with a rat or two, and ended up dead, being involved with an Egyptian prince of his own kind. I wonder what her kids, who were old enough, thought about where their mother was that night. Why was she in a hotel in Paris? No, I wouldn't want to be a princess, and certainly wouldn't want to be her. It's a very sad story. And yet we keep this going. We keep this going. We're still acting as if happiness for a woman especially, but also for a prince, is to have the royal ending, the big wedding with the white dress and all the lockstep marching bridesmaids and little girls chunking flowers and all the rest of it. The wedding business is worth billions and billions of dollars because even we, democratic Americans, still want, by and large, to get married like we were fairy princesses and princes of the realm. It's a little crazy. It actually is. I've never done this, but when I really get to the point that people think, well, he's old and lost his mind, I'm going to go to one of these big weddings, and when the minister says, as they still do in Episcopal and Catholic and Anglican Church, does anyone in this room object to these being lawfully married? And I would say, I object. I object to the question. Ask instead, is there any reason why they should get married? And let's have a group discussion on that. I'm not really selling books, but if you want to read a great wedding story, you know, some of you know. In my second book, it was on fire when I lay down on it. There's a story called The Mother of the Bride, which has been read all over the world at rehearsal dinners by people who have hostile feelings toward the mother of the bride. And just so you get the punchline, it'll be just as funny if you read it. And everything was the perfect wedding, and about halfway down the aisle, the bride threw up. And I don't mean just a polite little ladylike erp into her handkerchief. I mean, she, another projectile vomiting, she hosed the whole front of the church. Amazing story. It has a happy ending, amazingly enough, but you have to read it to find out. Anyhow, I could tell wedding stories for the rest of the morning. We are hilarious when amateurs try to do under pressure what we don't have much practice at, which is why people get married several times, I suppose. Well, I don't believe that Cinderella lived happily ever after. I don't believe in happily ever after. I believe ever after is always a mix of happy and not happy and true and not true and fantasy and reality. It's called life. Sometimes the bow breaks and the cradle falls. I was thinking about Little Red Riding Hood. Her name, Little Red Riding Hood's name is Emma Clare. And you want to know why, and I said, well, I used to know someone named Emma Clare that Little Red Riding Hood reminds me of. And think about that story. You all know it. I mean, the mother, a nice mother, gives her little girl some groceries to take to Grandma, who's living out in the woods. And she goes out, and on the way, she has a conversation with a wolf. And the wolf wants to know where she's going, and the little girl tells him exactly, gives him the coordinates and the GPS location, and the wolf goes ahead in the forest, and he gets there, his grandma and her granny couch swim, and the wolf, it has to be this way, he swallowed Granny whole and then put on the clothes of Granny, and he gets into the bed. And the kid shows up with a basket, and she's not terribly bright. She actually notices that her grandmother has a long nose and big eyes and fangs. So I had a grandmother like that, I can understand, but it's odd in the story that she doesn't recognize her, that the wolf is in her grandmother's clothes, and so the wolf says, yes, I have the bigger to see you with, the bigger to eat you with, and he swallows her whole. Now comes along the hero of all these stories. There's always a rescuer, some guy. Most of these stories are written by guys, I'm sure. It's time women will write their own fairy stories, but here comes the hunter. And the hunter takes his knife, cuts open the wolf, out jumps, fully clothed, Grandma and Little Red Riding Hood, no gastric juices on them whatsoever. And then they fill the wolf with stones and sew him up and let him go. I think the moral of the story is wolves should stay away from little girls. But here's the truth. The reason, you think about it, why is a little girl being sent out into the woods? What's the rest of the story? Then what happened? Why is she being sent out into the woods alone with the goodies for grandmother, who's also exiled out in the woods someplace? Because, of course, it's obvious. The mother was having an affair with the hunter. Makes sense. Happens all the time. They wanted a little girl gone for the day, and she went, and then again guilt felt to set in, and so the mother said, go find her and see what happens to her. I can't stand it. We've had a great day, but another time. And, well, I could go on with that kind of fantasy. The point is that the stories we know are not quite the whole story. Think about Jack and the Beanstalk. One of the strangest things about that, which is a growing up story, Jack goes out in the world, he's not terribly bright, trades a whole cow for a handful of beans. We know he's stupid. As a lot of little kids who hear the story think of themselves. And then, you know the rest of the story, the beans plant, there's this thing, and what he ends up with is a chicken that lays golden eggs. Then what happened? What do you feed a chicken that lays golden eggs? How long is a chicken going to last or live? Can you eat a dead chicken when it doesn't lay gold? Is there a market for gold eggs? And what about the price of gold that goes up and down? This is how I tried to keep my son awake or asleep, whichever it was. These stories are fascinating. My poor mother, she would tell me, I grew up on Bible stories, and she would tell me Bible stories rather than fairy stories. I didn't come to fairy stories till I was an adult and had kids. And there was always the story of the prodigal son. And I would ask my mother, was Jesus there? Did he know those people? Did he see what was happening? Did he make that up? Is that just a story Jesus made up? Or what's the truth of that? My mother had a hard time handling that. And then I would say, I wonder what happened after the prodigal son came home. He had a brother. The Bible is very clear. He has a brother. I was thinking about brothers and what happened next. And while the big party was going on to welcome back the son who had wasted everything, the son who had stayed and been good and behaved himself and been loyal to the father thought, the hell with this. And he went around to all the houses while people were out at the party and took all their purses and their wallets and their gold. And he hit the road, and he wasn't coming back. Well, some of this is foolish, I know, but the truth is that life does go on. There's always the rest of the story. Anybody who tells you they've lived happily ever after, look a little more closely, or you look at your own life. We follow these scripts of hopefulness that we go out into the world and something good will happen, and in the end, at least the end will be something we can live with. And the end now becomes not happily ever after, but he makes the best of things, who makes the best of things. One of my favorite Charlie Brown cartoons shows Charlie Brown and Lucy talking. And Lucy says, Charlie Brown, you remember when we were young? And Charlie Brown says, no. And she says, don't you wish you knew then what you know now? And there's about 3 panels where Charlie Brown is thinking hard. And then he says to Lucy, what do I know now? Well, at least we know that all stories don't have a happy ending, but stories do go on. Just as this church does. I think about who will be sitting here 100 years from now. Not you. Who will be standing here 100 years from now? Not me. But because we were true to our values and our hopes and our dreams, something will be here worthy of us. Thanks for your company.
And thank you for yours. We now close our service with hymn number 348, in which we invite one another to accompany us, to guide our feet, hold our hands, stand by us, and search our hearts in this race of life. Please rise as you're able and join in singing.
Guide my feet while
Friends, may life bless us and keep us. May the light of life shine upon us and out from within us, and be gracious unto us and grant us peace. For this is the day. This is the wild and precious life that we are given. So let us each find some way to rejoice in it and to be glad. Go in peace and make peace. Amen.